Discipline. It is the mortar that keeps the bricks of any military organization in place. You don't really get to be in such an organization until you have become intimately familiar with the concept. This usually starts in basic training and is often reiterated in places like officer candidate school, in which you spend a lot of time being dressed down by those in charge. When you get out into the fleet or the field, however, this happens a lot less frequently, but it does still happen. Sometimes mistakes happen, and sometimes stupid mistakes happen, and briefly, personnel have to be reminded of that which they already know by their superiors. The reprimand scene is a hallmark of most military movies and TV shows. From Maverick and Goose getting chewed out by Principal Strickland in his office on the Enterprise in Top Gun, to Gunny Highway getting reprimanded by that werewolf pastor from Silver Bullet in Heartbreak Ridge. The reason why these scenes are practically required in military dramatizations is because they don't occur very often in civilian life. In civilian life, if your boss is giving you a hard time, you can quit. This is America. But in the military, not only are you bound by contract, but there are severe legal and cultural penalties for not just standing there and taking it like you're supposed to. Today we're going to look at my top 3 verbal reprimand scenes from Star Trek, or, as they might say in Texas, my top 3 Star Trek verbal ass-chewing scenes, plus 2 honorable mentions. I'd like to point out something before we start. While we may look at these kinds of scenes and chuckle, they are anything but funny when they are actually happening, particularly to you, or just happening while in the same room with you. Laughing at the theatrics of military leadership during one of these moments has a tendency to invite you to the party, or worse.
Never in my life have I seen...
Do you think I'm funny? Do I make you laugh? Do you think I'm a comedian, son?
I'm sorry. The first words and the last words out of your stinking holes will be, sir! Do you get me?
Sir, yes, sir!
See that armory? Run around it. Run, I said! Run! Trotsky, keep pace! Move!
Now, I've put some restrictions on the scenes that I've chosen, mostly for brevity's sake. The first one is that, unlike that moment we just saw from the film Starship Troopers, we won't be seeing any boot camp or training scene reprimands. There aren't very many of those in Star Trek anyway, since the bulk of Star Trek takes place in the fleet rather than in training environments. Second, I haven't included any scenes in which a Starfleet officer chews out someone who isn't assigned under their command. The first honorable mention is a short one, from early in the life of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In the second season episode, Cardassians, Dr. Bashir interrupts a conversation that Sisko and Gul Dukat are having over subspace radio just as their conversation was ending. Bashir questions Dukat on a sensitive subject, and that causes Dukat to end the transmission in a huff. Bashir turns to Sisko to offer an apology.
I'm sorry, Commander. It just seemed an opportune...
Don't apologize. It's been the high point of my day. Don't do it again.
Now, not only is this reprimand quick and cold, but it also lets us in on Sisko's command style, which was very different than Picard's over on TNG. Sisko is a master of multi-layered messaging. His eyes say one thing, his words say another thing, and his tone says yet another thing. The complete message is nuanced and invites you to figure out where exactly he stands on the matter. Sisko did a lot of yelling on his show, but it was moments like this one, in which he spoke softly, that make him special amongst the leaders on Star Trek shows. Now for my second honorable mention, I've got a bit of an odd duck. It is from the second J.J. Abrams Star Trek film, Into Darkness. It takes place shortly after the opening credits of the film. Now, normally, I wouldn't include any licensed Star Trek productions in a list like this one, but I included it here because it helps to enhance another one on the list, and it happens to be my favorite moment from Into Darkness.
Uneventful.
Admiral?
It's the way you describe the survey of Nibiru in your captain's log.
Yes, sir. I didn't want to waste your time going over the
Yeah,
details.
tell me more about this volcano. Data says it was highly volatile. If it were to erupt, it would wipe out the planet.
Let's hope it doesn't, sir.
Something tells me it won't.
Well, sir, volatile is all relative. Maybe our data was off.
Or maybe it didn't erupt because Mr. Spock detonated a cold fusion device inside it right after a civilization that's barely invented the wheel happened to see a starship rising out of their ocean. That is pretty much how you describe it, is it not?
The Captain Kirk of the JJ films was a joke. No offense to Chris Pine, but the idea that a cadet with less than 4 years of academy training could be promoted to first officer and then captain of a prestigious ship like the Enterprise, or any ship for that matter, was just too much for this Star Trek fan to accept. I can suspend my disbelief for things like starships and time travel and alternate realities, but I cannot do so for something like this. No naval-type organization is going to, based solely on a student's test scores and such, offer them such a huge leadership role in the beginning. They just wouldn't do it. It's my opinion that the person who wrote that into the plot of the first film either didn't understand that this wouldn't happen in such an organization, or they didn't care, neither of which is a good thing. So what we have here is what I call Poser Kirk. He's a cadet that got to skip all the ranks, ensign, lieutenant, JG, lieutenant, lieutenant commander, commander, as if all of those ranks and that gradual learning and maturation process were worthless. And this is why I included this scene. Pike's reprimand addresses my biggest problem with the 2009 Star Trek film.
You have any idea what a pain in the ass you are?
I think so, sir.
So tell me what you did wrong. What's the lesson to be learned here?
Never trust a Vulcan.
Oh, so you can't even answer the question. You lied. On an official report, you lied. You think the rules don't apply to you because you disagree with them.
Poser Kirk demonstrates in this scene precisely why he should never have been super promoted to captain in the first place, as he loses military bearing and argues with Pike almost as if he's in a civilian workplace. He doesn't stand there and take it like he's supposed to. Pike also accuses Poser Kirk of playing God. That might be important. We might see an accusation like that a little later on. In any case, Poser Kirk falsified a report. Yet that fact goes right over his head, and he instead chooses to focus on his stellar record of no Enterprise casualties under his command.
That's why you talked me into signing up in the first place. It's why you gave me your ship.
I gave you my ship because I saw greatness in you. And now I see you haven't got an ounce of humility.
What was I supposed to do? Let Spock
You're
die?
missing the point.
I don't think I am, sir. What would you have done?
I wouldn't have risked my first officer's life in the first place. You were supposed to survey a planet, not alter its destiny. You violated a dozen Starfleet regulations and almost got everyone under your command killed.
Except I didn't. You know how many crew members I've lost since I took
That's
the
your
captain's,
problem.
sir?
You
Not
think
one.
you're
Not
infallible.
one.
You think you can't make a mistake. It's a pattern with you. The rules are for other people.
Some should
And
be.
what's worse is you're using blind luck to justify your playing God.
Pike then drops the bomb on Poser Kirk while simultaneously telegraphing that Pike is on Poser Kirk's side.
Given the circumstances, this has been brought to Admiral Marcus's attention. He convened a special tribunal to which I was not invited. You understand what Starfleet regulations mandate be done at this point. They've taken the Enterprise away from you.
Okay, we're at the halfway point in the video, and I just want to give a brief channel update and tell you about our new sponsor. The last sponsor pulled out because when I constructed the video, I played the audio of their commercial a little bit too low, and when they saw that, they flipped out and didn't pay me. So I had to find another sponsor, and I'm lucky enough to say that I did find one. And so I'll be running their commercial here in a few seconds. The commercial is interesting because it does remind me of an ex that I once had. But I'll be right back with more Star Trek after this.
Now, from Banquet comes...
What is it, Cynthia? What is it?
Giblet gravy and sliced turkey.
Yes, giblet gravy and sliced turkey, together in the most significant frozen dish of our time, buffet supper.
Winner of 3 Banquet Academy Awards. Best sliced turkey.
Best performance by a giblet gravy in a supporting role.
Best performance by a housewife.
I just put it in the oven, and by it was done. And I had a delicious buffet supper. Oh, yes, I did. Slices of turkey, all covered with gravy and little bitty giblets. Do you hear me?
From the same producers who brought you Beef Stew
Salisbury steak with gravy.
and the unforgettable chicken and dumplings comes the outstanding banquet production of the 20th century, giblet gravy and sliced turkey.
Color by Paprika, now appearing citywide in a frozen food section near you.
Now on to my actual list. These top 3 could really be in any order, but the first one I'm going to talk about establishes a direct contrast to the last one I talked about. Most of you probably knew this one was going to be on the list. It is from one of the most celebrated episodes of the original series, The Trouble with Tribbles. Even people who do not consider themselves to be Star Trek fans are aware of this one. It was perhaps the most delightful episode in the most delightful Star Trek series of all time. That's a word I choose to describe most of the original series. Delightful. Back in 1967, the makers of TV shows were actually trying to delight their viewers and fans instead of pissing them off like they do today. In the episode, well, I'll just let Real Kirk explain it to you via his log entry.
Captain's log, stardate 4525.6. A small disturbance between the Klingon crew and members of the Enterprise crew has broken out aboard Space Station K7. I am forced to cancel shore leave for both ships. I want to know who started it. I'm waiting. Freeman. Who started the fight?
I don't know, sir.
All right. Chekhov. I know you. You started it, didn't you?
No, sir, I didn't.
Well, who did?
I don't know, sir.
I don't know, sir. I want to know who threw the first punch. All right, you're all confined to quarters until I find out who started it. Dismissed.
Noticed how relaxed Real Kirk is, even when he's acting tough. He swaggers. He's the alpha in the room, and he's very much aware of it. You're going to detect a level of maturity here that, in my opinion, is higher than anyone else on this list. Real Kirk is very much interested in finding out who started the fight because he has fairly determined that that is whom he will direct most of his penalty towards. Kirk also knows he's being lied to by Freeman and Chekhov, but he doesn't take offense. He's been in their position, you see. Unlike poser Kirk, Real Kirk has been an ensign, and all the ranks in between, and probably even found himself in a similar situation. He looks at being lied to as an indication of camaraderie rather than an indication of disrespect. After he dismisses the personnel, he tells Scotty, his chief engineer, to stay behind. Kirk is even more relaxed here, coming off more like a concerned parent at times than a hardened military leader.
You were supposed to prevent trouble, Mr. Scott.
Aye, Captain.
Who threw the first punch, Scotty? Scotty.
I did, Captain.
You did, Mr. Scott? What caused it, Scotty?
They insulted us, sir.
Must have been some insult.
Aye, it was.
You threw the first punch.
Aye. Chekhov wanted to, but I held him back.
You held... Why did Chekhov want to start a fight?
The Klingons say... Is this off the record?
No, this is not off the record.
I love that moment when Scotty asks if this is off the record and Kirk immediately shuts him down. It would not surprise me if this part was ad-libbed. So Scotty begins to tell Kirk how the fight got started, and what we get is innocent, pure television gold. It's no wonder people call this the golden age of television.
Well, Captain, Klingons call you a tin-plated, overbearing, swaggering dictator with delusions of godhood.
Is that all?
No, sir. They also compared you with that Danubian slime devil.
I see.
And then they said that you were...
I get the picture, Scotty.
Yes, sir.
And after they said all this, that's when you hit the Klingons.
No, sir.
No?
No, I didn't. You told us to avoid trouble.
Oh, yes.
And I didn't see that it was worth fighting about. After all, we're big enough to take a few insults.
And there is, again, that accusation of perceived godhood that we heard earlier in the Poser Kirk scene. What sets The Trouble with Tribbles apart from every other episode of the original series and from most of the rest of Star Trek is that this episode was, in a sense, a sitcom, a situation comedy. The characters were acting just like they always do and taking things just as seriously as they always do, but they weren't in a particularly serious situation. I doubt the writers of STD would know the first thing about pulling something like this off. As I said, this episode was a rarity. The only other Star Trek shows I can think of that managed to pull something like this off were on Deep Space Nine, with their Quark-centric episodes, as well as episodes like You Are Cordially Invited. Finally, Kirk gets to the root of why the fight started.
What was it they said that started the fight?
They call the Enterprise a garbage scow. Sir.
I see. And that's when you hit the Klingons?
Yes, sir.
You hit the Klingons because they insulted the Enterprise, not because they...
Well, sir, this was a matter of pride.
All right, Scotty. Dismissed. Oh, Scotty, you're restricted to quarters until further notice.
I love how Scotty is so pleased with himself as he tells Kirk when he hit the Klingon officer. Of all the ones on this list, this one is the nicest one. It's the very definition of family entertainment. From the lightheartedness of the first iteration of Trek, we now come to what is commonly thought of as the darkest of the Star Trek shows. Once again, we return to Deep Space Nine. In the first season episode, Captive Pursuit, the first alien to come through the wormhole turned out to be a creature that was bred to be hunted for sport by another race. This is one of those episodes that portrayed Starfleet's prime directive as situationally or circumstantially inappropriate. Chief O'Brien manages to incapacitate the alien hunters and provides a means for the alien they are hunting to escape. The inevitable result of these actions takes place in Sisko's office.
Just what did happen at that security checkpoint, Chief?
The weapon sensors must have overloaded in all his various gear, sir.
Must have.
Yes, sir. It must have, since I increased their output by about 200%.
So in effect, you assaulted him. Our first contact with a new species.
Yes, sir.
Sisko's tactic here is to ask, perhaps rhetorically, what the Chief would do in his place, relying on the compartmentalization of organizations like Starfleet. A first-year crewman wouldn't know what a chief knows, and likewise a chief wouldn't know what a commander knows.
We've got dozens of top-level officials back at Starfleet Command eagerly waiting to hear about our encounter with the first new life forms to come through the wormhole. How do you suggest I write up this report?
I love how the chief, who now has the same responsibilities as an officer would on the station, tries to talk like one and gets shut down.
Sir, I'm not one to say, but... well, you know, these hunters weren't any happier than we were at having to bring Tusk home. It seems to me, in the interests of mutual understanding and future relations...
Save it!
Well, Sisko isn't having any of that. He then rattles off the list of infractions.
You ignored your duty to Starfleet. You took off your comm badge so you could ignore me. You even ignored the Prime Directive by interfering with their damned hunt.
Then Cisco delivers an indirect ultimatum. I love these, by the way.
Another stunt like this, and your wife won't have to complain about the conditions here anymore. Do I make myself clear?
I understand. I was surprised by one thing, sir.
What's that?
Well, I knew I couldn't override all the security seals in the station. And I figured once you and the constable located us, well, it'd be over. We'd find ourselves locked behind some force field somewhere.
I guess that one got by us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Dismissed.
And with that multi-channel communication Cisco used in an earlier clip, he simultaneously tells O'Brien that he had help, and that his reprimand is a formality that will go nowhere. Cisco even smiles to himself, knowing that the Chief now knows this too. The last reprimand scene on the list is from the 3rd season of Star Trek Enterprise, a season that saw many changes to the ailing show that began bringing the show out of the doldrums and continuity mess that permeated the first 2 seasons. The 3rd season of Enterprise was one big miniseries in which the NX-01 was sent out on a kind of search and destroy mission. The ship found itself in the Delphic Expanse, an area notorious for dangerous Bermuda Triangle-like phenomena. The Enterprise was in search of a race building a weapon that they intended to use to destroy Earth. Prior to this mission, all of the scientific personnel on the NX-01 were replaced by something that we had never seen before in all of Star Trek: humans belonging to a completely different branch of service. The Mako unit that came on board for this mission was, unlike Starfleet, pure military. They also had different ranks, gear, and uniforms than the Starfleet personnel. Archer asked for them because he wanted all the muscle he could get for this mission, much to the chagrin of Malcolm Reed, the NX-01's armory officer, who had previously done the kinds of things that the Makos would now be doing on this mission. Reed formed a rivalry with the Mako's commanding officer, Major Hayes. This rivalry culminated in a rather spirited sparring session that turned into an out-and-out fight. A few hours later, they found themselves in Archer's stateroom.
Dr. Flock says you have a detached retina, a bruised left kidney, we're in a dangerous region of space. We're trying to stop an alien race from destroying Earth. We face attacks from all sides, enemies everywhere we go. The last thing I need is to hear that 2 of my senior officers have been admitted to sickbay because they suddenly regressed to the level of 5-year-olds.
Captain.
Don't try to tell me who started it. I don't know what the problem is between you two, and to tell you the truth, I don't care, but I want it settled right now. Settle it! That's an order!
There's no problem, Captain.
It's settled, sir.
Unlike real Kirk, Archer isn't interested in who started it. The situation is different. He's dealing with a situation in which his own people are misbehaving towards each other rather than towards an antagonist like the Klingons. Scenes like this one were part of a transformation that the Archer character was undergoing in the 3rd season, where he's transitioned from an astronaut-like character into more of a submarine captain-like character. Instead of doing what Cisco did and asking them what they think he should do, Archer pragmatically reminds them about their mission, something they obviously lost sight of as they were pummeling each other. Archer really doesn't want to be having this conversation, and he momentarily slips back into his usual self here.
How are the drills going?
Good, sir.
Very good, sir.
Of course, Reed and Hayes are still very much in reprimand mode. Then comes the finishing touch on this scene.
Archer,
Please come to sickbay, Captain. The alien has regained consciousness.
On my way.
Think we're dismissed?
I can't tell you how many times I saw this happen when I was in the Navy. Officers forgetting that their personnel can't move without being dismissed. Sometimes they pretend to forget, sometimes they actually forget. I love that we're left not knowing which one it is here at the end of this scene. Alright, so that's my list. You may have noticed two conspicuous absences on the list, namely Picard and Janeway. The only memorable reprimand Picard ever gave, in my opinion, was to Cadet Crusher, who at the time of the episode wasn't under his command, so I didn't include it. As far as Janeway goes, many of you also know that I don't really consider her a military-style leader. She just didn't come off that way to me. She came off more like a college professor on an extended field trip to me. Does that make me sexist? Probably. I mean, I don't care. But I do care very much that you watch the video. Thank you so much for sticking with it to the end. Be here next time and get wagnified.